welcome along to the Property Academy podcast by Opus Partners. I'm your host, Steve McKnight.
And I'm Andrew Nichol.
And today's show, we're having a debate, property versus shares. Now, this comes from a listener of the show who's got a bit of money and is just saying, well, should I put it into some more property? Should I expand my portfolio? Or should I invest in shares? And so Andrew and I are going to argue it out. We're going to have a little tussle. And I'm going to take the side of shares and funds.
Someone asked me the other day, one of our team said, who would win in a fight out of you and Ed?
I asked Angela that, my partner, just the other day. I said, who would win in a fight out of me and Andrew? What did your team say?
So they said you would fight, as in me, would Ed stronger now that he goes to the gym, but you'd fight dirty. And I was like, yes, I'd bite his ear or something like that, gouge his eyes.
You would try and nibble on my ear, gold.
What did Angela say?
Oh, she said me. Because you get a bit shy.
But yeah, wrestling another man is a bit shy.
I've put you on the floor many times, Andrew, and I'll do it again. And so we're going to argue. We're going to talk about property and some shares. Here we go. And when it comes to this podcast listener, they've told me they've got 2 investment properties already. They've set up an investment folio, like invested in funds. It's been a bit of a tumultuous time, is what they said. So I think over the last couple of years, they lost 5% in their portfolio. Now they're seeing some growth in their share portfolio, kind of 15, 20%. So seeing some ups and downs of both. They're just saying, well, what do I do next? So Andrew, let's go head to head. What is your argument for property?
Well, to start out, I thought I would talk to Sharon Colwick, who's the Hawke's Bay Property Investors Association president. Here's what she said. She said the benefits with property are obvious.
So you're saying that you don't even have your own arguments. You've just gone and found somebody else's.
Well, I thought I'd get someone independent, completely independent, tangible.
You wanted someone independent, so you went to the president.
Are you going to talk over my entire and Sharon's entire argument? Tangible, so you can drive past it. You can walk past it. You can see it. You can touch it. And you've got more control. So you can choose to... You can choose to renovate a property. You can choose the tenant yourself if you want to. You can't do that with shares. But the number one thing, the secret sauce with property, is leverage, right? You don't get just a return on your money. If you put 150 grand into shares, yeah, you might get a return on that. You get a return on, let's say you get a 10% return. That's what, 15 grand. If you put that 150 grand as a deposit into a property, you could buy a property worth $750,000. Now, if that goes up by 10%, you've made 75 grand. Huge return on your deposit. 50%. What do you say to that, Edward Christian?
Well, what I'd say is that's actually the bad thing about property as well. So the whole idea about property and getting leverage is great because let's say you've got a deposit and we're going to make this up in the spreadsheet now. You know, your deposit's $150,000. You use that as a 20% deposit. And so therefore you go and you are able to buy an asset, or we'll call it a house price. Cool, yeah.
I did this in my head, but you know.
$750,000, right? So you've got a mortgage of $600,000 and you've got equity in that property of $150K. Sweet. That is all good and we're all pretty comfortable with that. Spreadsheets, I love. My data.
I didn't know you could do
My data is much more than a spreadsheet. Do you remember that song?
I do.
How I love it. It is neat.
Remember the Christmas special you were going to do?
A special place where I could find the truth and prove my property strategy.
Oh,
do you remember that?
Yeah,
that's one of my best. What were you going to say?
What was the I am a P, I am a PR.
I am a PR, I am a PR, I am a PR, P-E-R-T-Y investor, and I have M-O-N-E-Y in the B-A-N-K-S, and I'll retire comfortably because Opie's partner spoke to me.
Yeah.
Anyway, so I'm not sure if anything of that's going to make it into the show.
Hopefully not.
But we've got a house price of $750K, equity of 150. Now, let's say that the value, as Andrew said, goes up by 10%. Well, your house value is then $825,000, and your equity, as long as your mortgage doesn't stay there, and as long as your mortgage stays the same, is then going to be $225,000.
You're rich.
And as Andrew said, you've made $75,000. And you're like, wonderful. If property prices go up, then I've made a lot of money. But the difficulty is the more leverage you have, yes, the more opportunity for gain, but also the more opportunity for loss. So let's see what happens to your equity if property prices, instead of going up 10%, they go down 10%. Now you've got a mortgage of $600,000 against a house value of $675,000. And now all of a sudden you've lost 75 grand. And so the more debt you have, yes, it magnifies or it multiplies your gains, but it also multiplies or magnifies your potential losses as well. And I think that's the thing that a lot of people who are thinking about investing in property often forget about. Like, yeah, you can make a lot of money, but if you mess this up, you can lose a lot of money as well. So let's say you buy the investment property values go down by 10%. In this case, you've lost 75 grand. Let's say you took that 150 grand, you put it into shares. Share values go down by 10%. You've only lost 15 grand. And so you've just got to be careful with the debt because, yes, it magnifies your wins, but it also magnifies your losses.
Next thing that I would say with property is that you don't have to have the money to get started, or you don't have to have a lot of money to get started. A lot of property investors get started using the no cash needed method. So that's where, rather than have 150 grand to put into shares or property, you use the 150 grand worth of equity in your home to be able to get started. So an investor could arguably buy the $750,000 property and get growth on a $750,000 property or losses, but either way, they're going to have an asset without actually having to use cash if they've got equity in another property.
Yeah, okay, so you're saying, hey, look, you can buy a $600,000 house. You don't actually need $600,000. Not only can you borrow money against that, but you can also borrow money against your own home to go and purchase that. And you can't, it is true, you can't really do that with shares. You can't go into the bank and say, I own this house. I want to borrow 100 grand against this house so I can invest in shares. Now, if I wind back the clock 20 years, you probably could do that.
You could, absolutely could back in the day. And against your shares, but it got very, very dangerous. That's when exactly what you're saying before becomes a real problem. You have a large amount of debt and then volatility causes major losses.
Yeah, I was watching Margin Call over the weekend.
That's a good movie.
It was terrible. It was an awful movie. Like, nothing happens in it.
Oh, there's good old classic.
Yeah, well, it's not very good. But anyway, that's basically what happened in the movie.
Two thumbs down by Ed McKnight.
Don't go and watch it. It's not a very good movie. But what I would say to you, Andrew, what you're wrong about and always have been, is you're sitting there acting like, oh, well, it's really easy to get in property. But the thing about property is it's got extremely high barriers to entry. So you're like, all good. I've got this house and I'm going to borrow money against this house to go and buy another house. But as some people told me on TikTok the other day when I was talking about this.
Sorry, I wondered where you're getting this information from, TikTok.
Yes, when I was on TikTok the other day, as some commentators told me, show us how to do it without owning a house first. So the issue is that there are some barriers to entry if you're going to get started, if you're going to invest in property the way you're describing, which is you need to own another house first.
Yeah.
And that can certainly take some time. Whereas if you think about it, anybody listening to the show could go to Sharesies or Hatch or Stake or any of those online share platforms and buy a part of a share, a portion of a share for like $1. You could get started as an investor buying shares in like half an hour like that if you just go sign up, transfer some money over. Like way, way, way lower barriers to entry. And the other thing which I think a lot of property investors don't fully appreciate is when you do what you're describing, Andrew, you go out and you buy a house for like 600 grand, you have invested 600, you've got an asset worth $600,000, but it is one house in one location or one street in one suburb in one city in one country, right? And so you are heavily reliant on that single asset right there. And a whole heap of things could happen to it. There could be natural disasters, which mean that the value of the surrounding properties go down. There could be a recession that means that there are fewer jobs in the specific city that you have purchased in, and therefore property prices are stagnant for a long time. You are so heavily reliant and concentrated on one specific asset. Whereas if you compare that to a fund, if you put $1,000 into a managed fund, that money could be invested all around the world. And you might think, okay, well, that means that I'm a bit more diversified. That's good. But there's also a real investment benefit to that, right? So if you own one property in one location, what's likely going to happen to the value of that property? It'll probably stay stagnant for a while. And then once that area goes through a boom, your property value will go up. Then it might stay stagnant for a while, and then there'll be a property boom and the value of that property goes up. That's what tends to happen. If you think about the returns you get from a managed fund portfolio, it's probably going to be more consistent because you are so much more diversified. Yep, your shares in the USA might not be doing so well, but perhaps the ones that are invested in the European Union are going quite well. So there's this big thing around diversification. If you're investing in funds, way easier to diversify because you can own shares in a whole heap of different industries. If you're thinking about buying 1, 2, 3 properties, you have direct investments, and so the value of your portfolio will go up and down much more. It'll be a lot more volatile. What say you to that? To that rant?
Yeah. Sorry, I'm just wake myself up again. Well, I think
also making money's boring for you, Andrew.
So I think probably one thing that you would need to remember though is stocks and shares are quite volatile, and you have daily fluctuations in the values of shares, and so you don't really get that with property. Like property, yeah, it will go up and down from year to year, but the changes aren't as extreme. What did that listener say? They had 16% gains last year. Look, we have some extreme years in property, but not that kind of gains year on year. And I think when you think about the fact that shares could arguably be worth zero at some stage. You could buy shares in a company that might fail, and now your investment is completely lost. Property is never going to be worth $0. It's still going to be worth something. There's still an intrinsic value there because it's property.
What companies have gone to $0?
Ooh.
Oh, he's not that prepared, is he? Oh.
What about Feltex?
Yeah, well, Feltex shares were, I can't remember exactly what they were, but they absolutely crashed. I actually think Feltex is still around.
Mike Hero's airline.
Were people buying shares in that?
Yeah.
What was that? Was that Polynesian Airlines? Was that what it was?
I can't remember.
I don't know. That'd be something that somebody who was prepared would turn up knowing. Poor Mike Pero. Mike Pero. Real estate.
Airlines.
Okay, I take your point, though, that shares are more volatile. And so, especially nervous investors, like if they're looking at the value of their portfolio every day, people often can get spooked out. I mean, I personally would recommend, if you're a long-term investor, I would not be looking at my portfolio's value every single month, trying to freak myself out about, yeah, I'm rich or I'm really poor, because you're not investing for month-on-month gains. Like, you're investing for long-term gains. So if you're going to freak yourself out, I'd recommend don't look at your portfolio as much. But what I would say about shares is they're extremely liquid because you actually know what those shares are worth. There is a market price. Whereas if you compare that to property, like you might have a property and it's kind of worth $600,000, but two registered valuers who are experts in putting values on properties could give wildly divergent values on what they think that property is actually going to sell for. And so with property, there's not really a set market price for your specific property, whereas there are for shares, because one share of Apple or one share of Tesla is the same as any other share of Apple or any other share of Tesla. And so if you think about, well, how quickly can I get access to my money? Let's say I've invested a whole heap of money into property and I've invested a whole heap of money into shares, and then I have a life event where I want to pull that money out. With shares or funds, you might be able to get that money out in like 48 hours. Whereas if you think about trying to get money out of property, it could take you at least 2 months. By the time you think, okay, I've got to find a real estate agent, I want to put that property on the market, I want to sell it, then the people who are buying it need to actually pay the money. That money goes to the lawyers, then the real estate agent gets paid, then I eventually get it. So it's this long process, like 2 months plus to get your money out of property, whereas it might only be 2 days when it comes to shares or a managed fund. Even if you think about, well, what if I want to borrow against a property? Well, then you've still got to go to the bank and say, hey, can I please get some more money? Depending on the conditions, depending on the interest rates, they may say yes, they may say no. They're going to be asking you what that money's for. If you want to sell your shares, hey, you sell your shares. Nobody's asking you any questions about it because it's your specific asset.
And so I guess the honest truth about either of these as an investment option is that there's no right or wrong answer. It kind of depends on your situation. I think people who are building up their wealth at the very start before they can enter the real estate market, they probably will invest in shares. Right now, it's become so accessible for everyday people to get into a shares account or a Hatch account or whatever it is and start investing in shares. And it's a great way to start building your wealth when you aren't borrowing against another asset and you're not leveraging against a property. But then you'll probably get to a point where you will enter that real estate market, and that's when you might have a higher concentration, like Martin Horse said the other day, in a single asset. Yes, it's going to be in Auckland, say, for example, and it's one property in one suburb that is subject to changes in that location. But then when you get a little bit older and you start to want to live off your portfolio, maybe then you're selling those properties again and you're putting them into shares so you've got more liquidity.
Yeah, it's quite funny because as I've said a couple of times on the show, my partner's a financial advisor. She helps people who've already got a lot of money kind of live off it in retirement. And what's really funny is we often see when we just talk about her clients without breaking confidentiality, she'll say, oh yeah, I've got this person who's made all of their money. And I said, how'd they make their money? There are basically only two ways.
Business property.
They were either a business owner and they sold it, or they bought a whole heap of rental properties. They went up in value, then they've sold it. And that's the point where they say, sweet, I'm going to take all of that money. I'm going to diversify it, put it in shares, put it in funds, and then I'm going to live off it. And so you kind of see that a lot of people, before they own a house, they'll be investing a lot in shares. Then some people will say, well, now I'm going to move into property, go really hard on property. And then they move out of property again and say, hey, I'm coming back to shares. So it's not just, what is right. It's also what is right for me right now. And what stage are you at? So for me right now, a lot of my money is going just straight into property because it is an established wealth builder. Yes, you can lose a lot of money if values go down, but you can also make a lot of money. But they definitely both have their place. Having said that, I still think I won the debate.
I disagree. Well, that's still out for debate.
We'll have the debate. Let us know if you're watching this on YouTube.
Great.
Let us know.
Let the people speak.
Let us know down in the comment section about who won this debate. Was it Andrew on the property side or was it Ed on the share side? Would be very keen to know. And so we're going to wrap it up there, but please don't forget to rate, review, and subscribe to the podcast. It really does help us get the message out to more people. If you're listening to the audio version of this on your podcast app and you're thinking, I really want to see them yell. Ed.
I want to see them yell at each other.
I want to vote for Ed. Just Google Opus Partners YouTube. It'll be the first thing that comes up, and make sure you comment the words Ed won. And if you're watching this on YouTube,
and if you've got any sense, then do the opposite. Andrew won.
And if you're watching this on YouTube, make sure you hit the subscribe button. We release new videos on here every Monday and Wednesday. Thanks for listening to the Property Academy podcast. I'm your host, Steve McKnight.
I'm Andrew Nichols.
We're going to be back again tomorrow with even more daily strategies, tactics, and insights to help you get the most out of the New Zealand property market. Until next time.